Today we are going to talk about short answers and what you guys did with the lottery. We're going to go over some common issues and concerns that I saw with the majority of the writing, and I'm going to show you some good examples that your peers wrote and talk about some things that you need to do before you submit your short answer responses to the 451 analysis questions and to prepare you for your upcoming discussion. So some common issues that I saw with the majority of the writing. Now, like I said, it's not everyone's stuff, but the majority of you guys is the first thing would be in-text citations. Many of you either didn't include them at all, or if you did, you included them incorrectly. You'd put like page, and you'd literally write out page number 5, paragraph 14, stuff like that. If you see here in your example, it is the author's last name and the page number, but that's all you put in the parentheses, and you do not include the word page or the letter P or anything like that. You must have quotes. That is a requirement of ASA format, and you have to have it to support your answer. Also, you have to put your complete heading. I do not know how many times I wrote that on a paper. I did not take off points in this particular assignment, but I will be taking off points for those 451 short answers, and in future assignments. It is your first and your last name. It is the class period, the date, and the title. It is terrible to lose 20 points just because you are too lazy to put those few extra things on your paper. So please make sure that you do that. Some issues I saw with the quotes would be the fact that a lot of people didn't explain their quotes, they just repeated them, or they didn't expand on the theme. So you have one example here, the first one that's in all black writing. That is pretty much what the majority of people did. They said something like, Jackson is trying to convey the theme of fear. When the villagers stood away from the pile of stones in the corner and their jokes were quiet and they smiled rather than laughed, it is clear for the reader to see just how afraid these people are. This shows that the theme was fear. Okay, there's lots of issues with this. For starters, fear is a subject in the story, and yes, in that same aspect, it is a theme, but you guys need to be expanding more with this. You need to be telling me what Jackson is, or the author for that matter, is trying to convey to the reader about theme. What does she want you to believe or to do in regards to this topic that affects us all in real life? So if you look at that second example where you see the blue writing, I changed this basic idea and expanded on it. Jackson is trying to convey how the sense of fear can be so debilitating that one will bow down or run from it regardless of the consequences. So you see this idea that it's not just talking about fear in general, it's how Jackson thinks fear actually affects us. The other thing, of course, is to embed your quotes and to explain them. So in the first quote, I simply just put in, when the villagers stood away from the pile of stones. That is embedded, but the second portion where it's like, of course, this is clearly seen when the villagers stood away from the pile of stones. That is truly embedded. If there wasn't a quotation mark there to separate that out, you would struggle with knowing when the writing of the story began and my writing ended. Also, using transition words like of course is very beneficial to you. Finally, the biggest shift from that first quote and the second quote is the explanation. So a lot of you did this similar explanation that you see in the first one, where you just said, this shows that the theme was fear. For most of you, circled the word shows, and underneath it I wrote how. And I'm sure some of you were confused by this, but this example hopefully will let you see just what I mean when I say how. So on this second example, instead of saying this shows that the theme was fear, it says they are apprehensive to even go near an object that would normally cause little to no reaction from the average person. So I'm explaining to my audience that yes, it shows fear, but I'm explaining to them how it shows fear. Their apprehensiveness or being afraid of going near the stones is unusual. I also go further and I say a pile of stones, and I put that in quotation marks because I'm pulling that directly from the quote, is not that dangerous. So I'm even explaining it further. I'm explaining to the reader my thinking here. I feel like that stones or those stones would not be that dangerous, but these villagers have become so debilitated by their fear that they can't even approach what they consider dangerous. Even though they are aware of the deadly consequences these stones represent, they stay quiet and avoid it altogether. So I don't just say this shows that it was fear. I explain fully how it shows. And this is the kind of stuff that you guys need to be doing. I also want you to notice the drastic difference in length. The first answer is very short, while the second answer, that's pretty lengthy. If you were writing that out, it would probably be half a page, give or take. If you want to get the highest score possible on these short answers, that second answer is really what you're going for. And if you're writing 2 or 3 sentences and that's it, to be quite honest, you are probably not fully covering the topic and you need to fix that. So the next thing I want to discuss is the idea of avoiding repetition in your writing. A lot of you, I put the word repeat or repetitive. What this means is that you are just repeating the same phrases over and over again, or possibly even repeating the quote. I gave you an example below. The first one was common stuff I saw in Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery. The theme of Jackson's story, The Lottery, is, I feel like, and I didn't even highlight it in blue, I feel like that repetition is pretty obvious. You don't need to repeat the name of the story and who wrote it over and over and over again. It's very simple to solve this, and I'll show you on the next slide how to do so. Another common thing that I saw with repetition was just the repetitiveness of a single word or phrase. In Jackson's story, The Lottery, the theme is fear. For example, they stood away from the pile of stones in the corner because they were afraid of them. The villagers' fear keeps them from doing anything about the situation because they are afraid. This shows that fear is the theme. Very repetitive. I don't even feel like I should have to explain that. I feel like you can hear it, hopefully. That is very repetitive, same diction, same wording all the way through, and it definitely needs to be adjusted. So these are ways that you can fix your repetition. First off, just get rid of any unnecessary information. The example I gave you was in Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, the theme of Jackson's story, The Lottery is. I know you guys have been taught to start off with that in da-da-da-da, and you tell the name of the story, you tell the name of the piece. And yes, your teachers are correct in telling you that you need to include the name of the piece in your writing. However, not multiple times. So if you want to just say, in Jackson's story, The Lottery, the theme is, that's fine. That is actually better because you don't have that repetition over and over and over again. Of course, the other issue I saw with repetition was, like I said, the repetitiveness of phrases or keywords. I gave you 2 examples here. In one, I kept the original example where they just repeated fear and afraid. And actually, this is not anybody's real writing. I made this up. But in the second example where it says, in Jackson's story, The Lottery, the theme is fear, for example, they stood away from the pile of stones in the corner because they were afraid of them. So you establish this fear in being afraid. The villagers' apprehension. So here I changed the word fear to apprehension. This changes it. I know you may not think so, but it does. It takes away that repetitive nature. Yes, I'm saying the same thing. Apprehension and fear would actually be synonyms. However, by changing that one word to a different word, to making it a synonym of the original, I do away with that repetitive nature. And I do it again as I go down. It says the villagers' apprehension keeps them from doing anything about the situation because they are incapacitated by their emotions of dread. So instead of saying this shows that fear is a theme, I once again explain how, and I don't repeat that word fear. Yes, I want fear to be in it because that's my basic idea, but I want to change up my wording. I want to use synonyms and different diction to make it less repetitive. Okay, I've already pretty much talked about how to embed your quotes and how important I think it is, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. Basically, in your first example, they just say, for example, they stood away from the pile of stones. That was very common. That's what most of you did. I will give you props in the fact that at least you were trying to get away from those basic introductions to quotes, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But you do need to take it one step further. I want to see you embed that quote. I want to have that feeling where I don't know where your writing begins and their writing ends, or vice versa. I want it to all flow together. And of course, you can see that example that we discussed just a little bit ago here once again, where it says, of course, the reader can see this emotion of dread on display when the villagers make a point to. Now, I would also say that word stand, it was originally stood. I changed it to flow into my writing, which is totally acceptable. I put brackets around it to show that I changed it so that the audience knows that it's been changed. But other than that, it is 100% okay to do that. So please feel free to change the beginning of a quote just a little bit. I mean, not too much, but maybe you change it from he to their specific name, or like this, I change stood to stand to help with the flow of embedding it. So continuing in this idea of embedding your quotes, I need you guys to stop saying the following things. And these are just a few of them. A lot of you are still saying in paragraph 9 or on page da 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 da, paragraph da 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 da. Stop that. Stop. I'm glad your teachers taught you that initial idea of how to, embed your quotes and get that flow, but that is not true embedding, and it's very low level. So I want you to stop doing that. I did see other variations of it. Things like Jackson writes, the story says, stuff like that. I need you to get away from that. I want a real effort to get away from that stuff and start embedding your quotes. Remember that you can always use transition words like you saw on the previous slide where it says stuff like, of course, da 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 da, or when such and such happened. You can always paraphrase the beginning of a quote and put it in your own words and then tie in the end. Or, of course, you can summarize what's happened so far. But basically, you need to try and start embedding your quotes if you have not already. If you have, I am proud of you, and I like to see that attempt, so I appreciate it. Finally, I want to talk about some student examples. These are answers that actually came from your fellow students. No, I will not include names with them. Some of them I changed just a little bit to try and make it a little bit shorter so that it would fit on our stuff. But for the most part, this is identical to what your fellow students wrote. I like to share good examples that students did for two reasons. One, I like for you guys to see that it is possible for your peers and for you to be able to do this. And I also like to give props where props are due. I like to give good feedback to those of you who deserve it. Not that I can include all of you, because a lot of you could have been included on here, and like I said, we've run out of time, but I do try with both essays and short answers and things like this to include some good examples and explain why. This first one, she went, or he, I'm not saying it's a boy or a girl, went with the idea of discussing themes in the lottery, and this is how they answered it. They said one theme that Jackson is trying to convey with the lottery is blindly following tradition is dangerous. Overall, very good. A lot of people would have just stuck with the idea of the overall theme is tradition, and they wouldn't have said anything else. Also, the vocabulary here is excellent. Using the word convey, using the word innocent, things like that, very good. Good diction. Every year the small town holds the lottery but kills one innocent person. It wasn't like this, like Old Man Warner said. It's not the way it used to be. People ain't the way they used to be. The tradition of the lottery only caused damage in the village's society, and not only for the people being killed, as every year it became something they dreaded. So once again, some more excellent points here. They did a great job of embedding their quote. They did, of course, use the more easy version or the easier version of saying Old Man Warner said, but it was still very well done and very well executed, so it works nicely. They also use their in-text citation correctly, and then finally, probably the best part is their explanation, where they include and further their ideas rather than just repeating what the quote said. They explain how this quote shows you that tradition is dangerous, it's bad, and people are following it. So excellent job there. Your second and last example, just for time constraints today, also does some great things. It says, in the story The Lottery, compliance is the type of conformity that is most prevalent. Jackson portrays the villagers as being compliant and possibly forced in participating in a certain tradition. This can be clearly seen after Miss Hutchinson gets chosen. The whole village assumes a mob-like mentality and starts to circle her as she held her hands out desperately as the village moved in on her. And when someone gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles, he too joined in on the brutality. Of course, no one would try to do such an act by themselves, but with the help and encouragement, the whole village comes together and conforms. Once again, excellent things here. They do a great job of embedding their quote. Excellent job. They also have two quotes, which a lot of you did, but they handled the two quotes really well. A lot of you, I told you that you used too many quotes, and I think really you do need to try, especially with a single short answer, to keep it to one. But if you have multiple quotes, this is the kind of stuff you're going for. You want to combine those quotes into one, rather than having a quote breaking apart and then having another completely separate quote. Once again, they did a great job with their in-text citation with that Jackson 7 in parentheses. And then finally, their explanation was great. They explained very thoroughly just how this quote demonstrates their idea that compliance is the prevalent form of conformity. So great job again, guys. I hope this helps a lot of you, and let me know if you need anything about short answers in the future.